Hi, everybody. I'm Susan, and I'm an alcoholic. Um, I was struggling with what to talk about, and sort of a theme for my story. And this morning's reading was really good for me, um, especially the part where it said, "Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show and is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in her own way. If the arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do the way I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, I was sometimes quite virtuous. I was kind, considerate, patient, generous, and even modest and self-sacrificing. But then, when I looked harder, I was sometimes mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. And like with most people, those traits varied over time and space. Anyway, my sobriety date is May 5th, 1996. I grew up in New England by parents with a definite New England outlook. You know, the only way to do is to overdo. And I'll try to tell the story in chronological order, but for me, the past and the history keeps breaking through. Both my parents, I believe, had drinking problems, and I later found out that 2 out of 4 of my grandparents died of the consequences of their drinking. My maternal grandmother died of cirrhosis, and my paternal grandfather had a stroke. Also, in the throes of my research, I uncovered my maternal great-grandfather's arrest for DUI in 1936 that was published in the Hartford Courant for everybody to read about. So I feel like, I come by this situation honestly. The other theme for my talk is I've always been in a hurry. And when I was growing up, the thing that I was the best at was school. And I worked very hard to do everything perfectly and everything right and follow all the rules and please my parents and my teachers. If I did anything wrong or was punished, I would just shut down completely. I really think that if my dad had had a boy instead of 2 girls, that I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s when opportunities for women were burgeoning. And when we were talking about careers, my dad said, there's really no need for you to be a nurse or a teacher. He said, you could be the doctor and be the boss and get paid more. And besides, they say women aren't capable of doing that. So, you might want to give it a try. You're good at math. You're good at science. And so I took the dare. I left high school at 16 after my junior year. I went to college. I was very well prepared academically. I was completely unprepared socially. I was actually surprised when my husband-to-be introduced himself and told me that there was a library on campus where we could go and do homework. The fact that there was a library had never occurred to me, which is odd because I love reading and I love libraries. So that gives you an idea of how immature and how panic-stricken I was at finding myself in a new situation. I have never liked new things or strangers. And when Glenn told me he was going to record me today, I was initially absolutely panic-stricken. The last time I was videotaped was in medical school, and they had to stop the tape after about 3 minutes because I started to cry. I just couldn't go on. And the idea that I would cry in medical school was just so shameful to me. I was completely and unutterably humiliated. I'm actually shocked that I had the courage to go into pediatrics after that experience. So anyway, fast forward, I did well in school. I got through medical school. I married the love of my life. We had a year in Europe where I had my first child. We moved to Tallahassee. After a couple of hiccups, I found a great practice, great partners, people who wanted to work as hard and be as meticulous and careful as I wanted to be, and had my second child. I had everything. I had everything I ever wanted. I had the house, the car, the kids, the husband. Everything was going great. I didn't get along very well with my parents. I found them very blaming and shaming. I could never do enough to please them. And so I was gradually shutting them out of my life. And I was also drinking more and more, but I didn't realize that until a lot later. I remember my first drink, I was probably around 12 or so. A neighbor had brought over a gallon of homemade blackberry wine. It was very sweet. My parents didn't like it, so they gave some to me. I loved it. I asked for seconds. I ended up going to bed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They didn't seem to think anything of that. And, the experience wasn't repeated again for a very long time. But when I did drink in college, which was very, very rare, and only when other people were buying, because I was basically broke except for my money that I needed for books. And I'll tell you, science textbooks are damn expensive. So I didn't drink much in college, but whenever I did, I either drank until it was gone or until my husband had to walk me back to my room and put me to bed. Yeah. So fast forward to around 1990 or so, my sister called up. My mom had fallen and had shattered her kneecap. And my sister had just found out about it. It had happened before Christmas. And my dad had waited a week for her to detox on the couch until he called the ambulance to take her to the hospital to get operated on so that she could walk again. How he managed my 5'9" mother on the couch in the living room, I will never know, because he didn't ask for help and he did it all by himself. But I can't even imagine. She was convinced that my mom had fallen because she had been drinking. And we both knew that my dad drank because we had had ample experience of his rage attacks when we were teenagers. But he was a pretty tough nut to crack. So she, in therapy, had identified my mom as the more readily persuadable target and wanted to do an intervention. And all she wanted me to do was read a couple of books and write a letter. And that would be all the help that I was required to give, because they were up in Connecticut and I was in Florida. So I got the books in the mail and they sat on my desk and they sat on my desk and they sat on my desk. And after about 3 months, I realized that I was not eating, not interacting with my husband the way I would usually do, and that I was thinking about driving my car into a bridge abutment. And luckily, I was able to identify those thoughts as really bad. My dad's grandfather, the one who raised him, had shot himself when my dad was 9. And he had told me that that was traumatic, but he didn't say anything more about it. But for my dad to admit that something made him unhappy was a big deal, because he never talked about his feelings, ever. And I thought that I did not want to drive my car into a bridge abutment and do that to my kids, that would be really bad. And professionally and personally, both by training at home and training academically, I did not want to do anything to hurt my kids. That was just the last straw. The idea that I would be not acting in my children's best interest. So I called up a friend of mine who I referred patients to for child psychiatry and said, look, I'm thinking about driving my car into a bridge abutment. What would you suggest? And she suggested a therapist. So I went to the therapist and I really liked it. She was a great lady and I felt better after I talked to her. She suggested that I go to Al-Anon. She told me later that she screened me for alcoholism and that she didn't think I was an alcoholic. So she sent me to Al-Anon and I went a couple of times, but I found that it just seemed like a lot of whining to me, so I didn't go very much. And but I did feel better after I talked to the therapist, so I kept all those appointments and I calmed down some and things got better. I wrote the letter and I actually bought a plane ticket and went to the intervention. And my mom said she would go to therapy, would go to rehab. And then the next morning she called back and said, nope, she wasn't going to go. Dad and her were going to take care of things. They were smarter than everybody at the rehab place, and she didn't need that. So that was a bust. But I kept going to the therapist, and I kept working really hard. I was taking night call every fourth night, teaching residents, doing C-sections, going to the newborn nursery, making rounds in the hospital, doing the outpatient clinic, going to the emergency room at night. It was a lot. Oh, and by the way, my husband would travel about once a month for his job. And that would leave me with picking up and dropping off the kids and scheduling a babysitter to be there when I was on call. And as I said, it was a lot. But I was managing. I was coping. I was arranging the stage. So the therapist got these group therapy sessions together about once a year, and she would get a group of women and we'd all go to the beach and we'd have a great time. We'd talk, we'd do projects, we'd eat, we'd swim in the Gulf. And I met a lot of women who were in AA and I listened. They were nice people. They were really great. Changed my whole vision of what alcoholism was about. And I would always feel better after those group therapy weekends until the last one. In 1994, my medical partner was caught in the emergency room with alcohol on his breath. And the nursing staff called our office and spoke to all of the other three of us individually and said, if you don't do something about your partner, we're going to call the medical board and they'll come after your license because now you know that he's practicing impaired because we're telling you. And, oh, by the way, we'll also go to the hospital CEO and get your privileges damaged. So the three of us got together and they decided that because I'd already experienced an intervention, that I could organize an intervention on my medical partner, who was, I must say, a lot older than me. So I did that. I follow the rules. I do what I'm told. And that intervention was, at least at the beginning, superficially successful. He went to Talbot. And that meant that I was on call every third night. And that meant when anybody took a vacation, I was on call every other night. And that, I think, was what broke me. That went on for 2 years. My medical partner was at Talbot for 6 months, and then he gave us a letter saying he wasn't coming back. And we were not able to find another doctor to come and join us for 2 years. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was very, very, very angry. And I only realized that later. And I was in the position of, if you had my job, you'd drink too. So when I was not on call and not expected to be on duty, I would drink because otherwise I couldn't sleep because I was so anxious about everything that was going on. And I felt as though I was very close to the edge of not being able to keep all the balls in the air. And I didn't see any end in sight. So anyway, in May, after I got back from this group therapy session, I was sitting at the kitchen table, which is where I take my group meetings normally now. And all of a sudden it came to me what I was doing. I was coming downstairs at night after everybody was in bed, and I was finishing up the bottle of wine by myself, alone, and I was starting to open up another bottle of wine. And that was exactly the way my mother drank. The person that I most did not want to be like in the entire world. The person that I had directed all of my anger against. And I was flabbergasted. And terrified. So I got on the phone. I called up one of the women from the group and I said, Lynn, I think I'm drinking alcoholically. What should I do? And she said, oh, there's a meeting tomorrow at 6:30. I'll take you. I'll meet you there. You can go after work. And I said, but I'm too busy. I've got to pick up the kids. I have to make dinner. I have to do the homework. And she said, but do you want to be sober? And I said, well, I guess so, because I certainly don't want to be drinking like my mother, and that's what I'm doing. And she said, then you'll meet me at that meeting at 6:30. And I trusted her because she was a nurse and she told me about her professional supervision program and all of the things that she'd been through. And she still had her license and she was still in practice, even though it was an administrative practice, not a clinical practice. And she was a very bright, put together person who had kids who were not in jail. And I believed her. So I put aside all my buts and I met her at that meeting. And then she told me, you'll do 90 meetings in 90 days. And I said, but I've got night call and I've got this and I've got that. And luckily, her sponsor chimed in and said, yeah, but Susan, you don't have to do it perfectly. You know, you could do 2 meetings one day and skip the meeting on the day that you're on call. Oh, really? And for somebody who's got an advanced degree on the wall, that just shows you I was completely crazy. I was completely out of my mind. And I didn't know it. And subsequently, I heard someone describe denial as didn't even know I was lying. And the person I was lying to was myself. And my life was completely unmanageable by me. So anyway, that's what happened. And in the first year or so, much to my shame, I did not get the big book at all. Oh, I read it. They told me to read the big book. I read it. I read through it. I understood all the words. I could give you a definition of every single one and use it in a sentence, but I didn't get it. I read the stories. That was better. And I liked the one about the doctor. The one where he said that he tried out all of his stuff on his spouse. And the more he treated her like she was doing well, the better she got. So I tried that on my husband and it started to work. he annoyed me less and less the more I treated him like he was the best thing since sliced bread. And I was really excited by the fact that that worked. So I tried some of the other suggestions. And I got most of the suggestions that worked for me out of living sober, because that was really concrete. And that was the developmental stage that I was at. My thinking was not clear at all. And what I needed was for you to tell me what to do. And I could about get my head around, don't drink and go to meetings. And eat on time and eat some candy, because if you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, you're much more likely to feel like you want to drink. That was what I could wrap my head around. And that little yellow book really saved my life. So I started obsessively accumulating other AA literature, which helped. I read stuff about children of the alcoholic family, and that helped. That was non-conference approved, but it made sense to me. And I went to a lot of meetings. And I discovered that what really made my life easier was to do my work and then go to the happy hour meeting, which was at, I think, 6:15, and sit through as much of that as I could keep my butt in the chair for, and then go and make rounds and deal with the residents. And I got through rounds in half the time because I felt better and I could think more clearly. And that's what kept me coming back, was that promise really came true right away. So I'd like to say that I reconciled with my parents and that everything was great. It wasn't. I just couldn't get over my anxiety to ever tell them that I had gotten sober, because that would mean telling them that I knew that they had a problem and I didn't want to hear about it. I just couldn't. I was so afraid that they would continue with the blaming and shaming, because that had been the history, and I just couldn't deal with that. So I'm hoping that they know now how much I appreciated all the good things that they did for me, and how much I appreciate that they had it a lot worse than I did. All of the research that I've done on their lives and my ancestry, I remember my dad telling me that my maternal grandfather, the one who was the son of the guy who got arrested for DUI and whose family legend was that he was a bootlegger, that grandfather had scars on his back from the beatings administered by his dad. My dad was born before my grandmother graduated from high school. She got married because she had to. She was very wild and didn't do anything her parents told her. I found out later that her affair with the next door neighbor got published in the Hartford Courant because of a lawsuit for alienation of affection that took place when my dad was 9, right around the time that his grandfather, who had had custody of him since he was a baby, shot himself. And then my father was returned to his mother and his alcoholic father and was put to work. One of his jobs was to be a chorister at the Episcopal Cathedral, because they paid you 50 cents a week plus 35 cents for trolley car fare. And it's my conviction that those people later helped my dad get into college. He worked his entire school career from the time he was 9 until the time he graduated high school. And when he graduated, he ran away and joined the Navy. And that was 1940, which was either a very good or a very bad time to join the Navy, depending on your point of view. He worked his way up from enlisted person to lieutenant commander. He earned a commission. He taught at the War College in Newport. I remember him leaving in his uniform when I was little. He went to college at Trinity in Hartford, and I'm convinced that his Episcopal Church connections got him in there. He went to law school at the University of Connecticut. He passed the bar exam. All this done by a kid who barely got out of high school by the skin of his teeth because he was falling asleep on his desk because he was working until midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, shutting down the movie theater where he was head usher. He married my mother. They were married until the day they died. No divorce, no child abuse. He never touched us. He yelled and screamed, but we were never beaten. And I think that's a miracle, knowing where he came from, growing up on welfare. I'm also grateful for the atomic bomb. He was in the harbor in the Philippines a few days before the bomb was dropped with orders to take his minesweeper to the Sea of Japan and start sweeping preparatory to the invasion. He told me before he died that if it hadn't been for the bomb, I wouldn't be here because they were expecting 50% casualties in that invasion. So I have a lot to be grateful for, and I'm hoping they're listening. So I haven't felt it necessary to take a drink for over 25 years. There is no problem I have today that's going to be made better by me taking a drink, and I am convinced of that. Have I worked this program perfectly? Not just no, but hell no. I'm still very busy. I'm still very obsessive. I still find it very difficult to pray. I know that higher power is there. I know I've only got one day at a time, Stephen. And for that, I am very grateful. I used to obsess when I first joined the program on the tradition that says the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Because I never got a DUI. I never was caught by other people. My husband was not convinced I was an alcoholic when I got sober. I had to convince him. Since I've gotten sober, I've joined the choir, and I find it the most easy to pray when I'm singing or when I'm sitting and listening to a hymn. The best thing about choir is like the best thing about AA. We repeat those texts over and over again until it sinks into my hard head. And then when I'm stressed or I don't know what to do, one of those great stupid sayings from AA will pop into my head, like first things first, keep coming back, call your sponsor, go to a meeting, think about if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, and take care of that. Those things work for me. And they worked for me almost a year ago when I got a phone call on a Sunday about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that phone call was from my daughter. I have one daughter and one son. And the daughter said to me, Mom, I just got out of the emergency room. And I said, oh no, Lydia, are you all right? And she said, no, I'm not all right. I drank enough bourbon last night until I passed out. And then I woke up and I vomited on my husband and I fell down the stairs and I bashed up my face and I broke my nose and I cut my head and I'm sitting here in the ER and the doctor just told me that she thinks I have a problem. And I was flabbergasted. And Dr. Cross did not know what to do at that moment. She really didn't. But you know what? I reached back and I said to her exactly what was said to me. I said, well, sweetie, there's a meeting at 6:30 today. Do you want to come with me? And she said, today? Really? Right now? And I said, well, it's not till 6:30. You've got enough time to get home from the ER. She said, oh, yeah, I do. And she said, but I'm in Washington and you're in Florida. I said, that's okay. We're Zooming the meeting. I'll dial you in. And so I went to my home group that night early, and I met all my friends outside the door before they even had a chance to unlock the room. And we dialed up my daughter on the phone, and all my friends talked to her, and they did for me what I could not do for myself. They introduced her to this wonderful program that saved my life. Oh, and the therapist. I forgot about the therapist. So when I had this awakening right after group therapy, after I talked to Lynn and Kathy the next morning, because, I didn't want to intrude on my therapist's private life, I called up her office and left a message for her to call me. And I had the satisfaction of flabbergasting my therapist. She said, "Are you kidding?" She said, "I screened you. You were negative. What happened?" And so I told her what happened and what I was doing and how successfully I was hiding it from everybody except myself. And she said, "Well, good. What are your plans?" I said, "Well, 90 meetings in 90 days. And I think I have an appointment with you later this week." She said, "Great." And then she told me that she was in the program. And it all started to make sense. And I stayed with her for another couple of years. And she convinced me to turn myself into a professional supervision program. And at first, that professional supervision program was horrible because my former medical partner was in the same program. He was not working as a physician, but he did not want to give up his license. And his anger reminded me so much of my dad's, and I became a target for that. He never forgave me for turning him in. And I got a resentment against the therapist that led the group. But luckily, after about a year, he quit and we got somebody else. And funny thing, she was also a member. And she's one of my best friends to this day. I still keep in touch with her. I fulfilled my 5-year contract. I did all the meetings. I dropped all the urines. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating, but I did it anyway. And it made me feel better because I knew then that if anything happened, they couldn't touch my license because the professional supervision program would speak up for me. And my kids wouldn't suffer and they'd be able to stay in school because I would be able to keep my job. And that really helped me deal with a lot of my anxiety. I learned so much in that supervision program. At least 3 of the people I was in with are already dead. They kept going out, they kept relapsing, they kept doing research, and I had to watch it, and it was painful. My medical partner died when he was probably 4 years younger than I am now. He lost his job. He lost his practice. He lost his wife. He lost his kids. He lost his home. He wrecked at least 1 car and 1 motorcycle that I know about. And he died in a nursing home after he lost his mind. And so whenever we say the moment of silence for those still sick and suffering, I think about my medical partner who died. I think about my dad who drank after my mom died until he had the courage to shoot himself. And I hope that they're watching because they died so that I could be free. And I am so, so grateful to be here. And I hope that recording this helps others because I have been helped so much. Just looking at your faces and being able to hear your voices, it keeps me sober. Thanks for letting me share.